Good afternoon. We are testing out a new webcam and the internet in the new building. So if you are joining, just go ahead and send questions, throw anything you want to out in the chat. I want to fire up Facebook here as well. Hey, Ants Camping, how's it going? Let me know how the audio is sounding. You could hear me at least. Awesome. I am doing really well. I'm testing out the new webcam. I just hooked it up about 15 minutes ago. Audio's good. That's awesome. That's actually the audio from the camera too. I'm surprised that works as well as it does. Oh, let's see if I can remember my password. Hoping to get into the Facebook group and answer some questions live here. What's the white packs behind you? These guys. It's cellulose insulation. So it comes packed. You throw it in a machine, and then it kind of loosens it up and then blows it through a hose. So I'm going to put it in as the insulation in the ceiling once I get the ceiling panels all done. So for now, they're right there. And there's a whole stack there. There's a whole nother pile to my left, and that might be it. I think it's about 90 bags, something like that. Hey, Umar, how much is your monthly sales? Let's see. Right now, I'm trying to remember. I want to say we're averaging about 20 orders a week. So 80 orders. Average cost there, probably about $30. So whatever 80 times 30 is, $2,400. That's in the old building. And got to switch over to the new building here and then scale that up. So that'll be good. Who's under here? Oh, Ants Camping. I thought it was food for the mealworms. Nope. The food, actually, there's brown bags here. That's the wheat brand. That is food for the mealworms. Can you show us your roaches? The roaches are in the old building still. So I got maybe like 25 of them. I traded somebody some mealworms for some roaches. Somebody local here actually raises them for their, what was it? Not a leopard gecko, for their bearded dragon. So we swapped insects, but I have them over in the other building right now, so they're not here just yet. Thank you guys for the questions. See if I can get into Facebook. Okay, they just sent me a code. 812. All right. We are in. And Facebook just alerted me that I logged in. Yes, I did. Did you manage to find a nice way to ship the big quantities of Frass? What's that for? No. So I'm still using the plastic bags right now. I want to say I still have like 100 of those left. So I've got a bit of that inventory still to go through. But what I'm thinking about doing is I've been testing out shipping 2 10-pound boxes taped and then one strapped together. And so far, things have been shipping okay. I was a little worried about them coming apart or getting damaged somehow. When you do something new and different, it just kind of worries me a little bit. So far though, that's been working well. So what I might do is just use that because those are the paper bags and they're much better than plastic in my opinion. Supreme Gecko. Hey, we are in the new building today. So I've got a new webcam testing out. This is the first live in the new building. And I'm just kind of answering questions. I'm trying to get into Facebook to answer some of the Facebook group questions as well. See if I can give some more context to some of the things that are happening there. Do you ship internationally? I do not. So I don't know if Pakistan is very hot. 42 Celsius. Okay, I'm going to show my lack of knowledge here. 42 Celsius in Fahrenheit is 107. Ah, that is spicy. Did I read that right? 42. Yeah. Oh wow, I would not ship in that. Is it possible to ship and will they survive in such high temperature? So even if I could ship internationally, I would not ship in 107 degrees. Heat is actually the biggest concern from a shipping perspective. In the wintertime, like a lot of people get real paranoid about the cold. And yes, extreme cold, like below 32 for extended periods of time is not super good, right? But heat, it could take 5 minutes of heat and then those mealworms are going to just suffer and slowly die. And so that like there are actually scenarios where folks have gotten their mealworms and maybe like 10 were dead. And then over time, they'll reach out and say, something's going on. Am I taking care of them wrong? And what ends up happening is they basically turn to mush. They die and turn to mush. And you can tell visually by looking at them that they've died from heat. So they just get stuck. They can't recover from that and they end up dying. So 107 is way, way, way too hot to ship live insects. At least live mealworms. Superworms, I think it would still do the same thing. And you have to remember inside of the box, it's going to potentially get hotter, right? Like if that box sits in the sun, game over. Even on a decent day here, like I want to say it's like 60 Fahrenheit, which is 15.5 Celsius. If they sit out in a box in this sun, there's potential that they could die from heat. So we generally order 40,000 worms at a time and put a bunch in the fridge. What temp is best to hibernate the worms, and how long could they stay in the fridge? Awesome question. So what temp is best to hibernate them? I stick with right at 40 degrees. You can go lower, like you can get down into 35. But what bothers me about going lower is that if there's any variance or fluctuations in your temperature for the fridge, if it's just a standard fridge, set it at 40. And that way you'll have some spots in there that are going to get lower, right? But it should be right around 40. So you might get down to like 37 somewhere, like maybe up by where the cold air comes in. And then you'll have some of that potentially by where the cold air gets pulled out of the fridge as it cycles. But 40 gives you a variance. Like if you set it at 35, you might get a cold spot that's 32. And if it's consistently 32, they're not going to do well. So 40 degrees would be perfect. That's what I keep mine at. And that will slow them down, right? Like hibernate's a good way to look at it. Like it doesn't just put them in stasis. They will eventually grow. They could eventually pupate, right? Stress causes them to pupate, but they're going to go a lot slower. So if you were to take a container of mealworms and sit it out and a container of mealworms and put it in the fridge, same exact from like that same shipment that you get, the ones in the fridge are going to pupate a lot slower. How long could they stay in the fridge? So they can stay in the fridge for at least 3 weeks, but they're not going to be like fresh or optimal. What I would suggest is once a week, take them out of the fridge and give them some substrate. So like wheat bran, oat flakes, whatever it is that you're using, give them enough that they can eat it within, whatever quantity you've got there, that they can eat that within a couple hours, and then give them a moisture source. And after those 2 to 3 hours, take the moisture sources out. Like they might not finish it all. Take the moisture sources out, pop them back in the fridge. Good to go for a whole nother week. And they'll just keep doing that. Like you could do that for as long as you have the mealworms. They'll eventually start pupating, right? But they'll definitely be a lot slower at that point. Kate, Your name looks familiar. Hi, have you ever had an issue with finding little pieces of water crystal in your frass while sifting out mealworms? Yes. When we first started, when Ben and I first started, this was before Leo was working with us. When we first started using water gel crystals, what I found is that it's just like using potatoes or carrots or any moisture source. If you put in too much, you're going to find old stuff later. The problem with the water gel crystals is that they're small enough. In our case, they were small enough to get through the large mesh into the mealworms that we were trying to collect and harvest and ship to people. And so we had to taper off our water gel usage and basically figure out how much did a bin need in a particular 1 to 2 day span before it needed to be fed again. Because they would, the water gel crystals we use right now don't have nutritional value. And so once they dry up, the mealworms have no desire to eat them. So that's why you're finding them, right? So stop putting in so many so frequently, or depending on what your process is. Like for us, one of the things we thought about doing was put in a little container, like one of those blue bait cups. I don't know if you've seen those. I wish I had one here. I think they're back at the other building still. But those would be really good to hold water gel crystals in there. And then as they dry up, you can refresh them, right? Like you can put water back in them and they'll soak that back up. The other thing that I want to experiment with, and I've played around with it a little bit, is putting nutrients into the water, then putting the water gel crystals in. And so it incentivizes the mealworms to want to eat it. So that maybe, and this is the longer term test, I've tested them eating it. They eat it up just like normal water gel crystals, so no issues. But what I'm curious about is, will they eat them if they're dry? Because every now and then you get a bin in a stack that's just different, right? Like maybe the the beetles didn't lay very many eggs and they're just not going through the water gel crystals. So it'd be really interesting if, like you catch that and they're in there, but eventually they eat those because they've got some sort of nutrient in it. So I haven't tested that yet. I'll be curious to see what happens there. I'll give them more than they can eat in a few hours. That's good. So then you shouldn't be finding old ones because I wonder if they're fully hydrated, because the mealworms don't want to eat them, right? They're like I was saying, there's not any nutrient in there. So if it's dry, it's easier for them to eat substrate than it is for them to chew on that hard crystal. And so I wonder if they're not hydrated enough. So like how long do you, make sure I'm not missing anything. How long do you, after you add the water, do you let the water gel crystals expand and fill up? And like, do they feel kind of jello-y and sticky? That might mean that they're not hydrated well enough. So you could add more water to that if that happens. But I wonder if they're drying out before the mealworms really, like they don't have to constantly eat a moisture source. So they'll have some, then they'll wait. It's just like us drinking water, right? So I wonder if it's dehydrating and just not being eaten because of that. Awesome questions, guys. Oh, heading back over to the Facebook group here. Oh, somebody just commented about netting, protecting. Somebody was trying to protect their mealworms from bugs getting into the trays. And one of the suggestions from somebody was maybe to put some netting around it. And then I mentioned the same thing. And what's interesting is that Scott, who's one of the admins in the group, and I'm talking about the Mealworm Farming Co-op group that's out on Facebook. If you guys aren't there and you're on Facebook, come and join. Really awesome place. Whether you've been doing mealworms for 2 days or years, good place to hang out. So one of the things that you could do to protect those mealworms is to put a netting around them. Scott actually did that, and it killed all of his beetles. Turns out there was some sort of pesticide in the netting itself. And so anytime you introduce something new to your insects, do it on a small batch first. Do it on what you're willing to lose. So if you have 3 trays of beetles, don't do it on all 3. Do it on 1 and see how it goes. Any lesser known common mistakes people make with mealworms? Lesser known. The biggest one is just being patient, because they take forever to grow. Even in an optimal farm, it could take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks for ours to go from hatching to being big enough. Have you seen the video I put up? I can't remember when it was. Let me see if I can go find it. It's on YouTube now. I did a video on how I remove pupa and dead mealworms from my bins without some big fancy piece of machinery after I harvest them. Let me see if I can go find that. Like, one of the really interesting things about mealworms is the way that they congregate and move in a bin. It's super interesting. And what I found is that sorry, I got a message or a comment over there from Kate. What I found with their moving is if I made them deep enough. So in the blue trays that I use, this was different from the pizza dough proofing trays that I used previously. Those white trays. The blue trays, I can put 20,000 after I harvest. We can put 20,000 into one of those blue trays, and that's not like keep them there all the time. That's after they've been harvested, and that harvesting process is rough on them, and so it stresses them out. And then you'll get pupa, which is a pain because you don't want pupa. You want to ship the larva, right? And so what I found is if I left them overnight, so put them in that tray with 20,000, put like a scoop of bran, a scoop being like a cup. Is a good amount for 20,000, maybe a little bit more. And then put some water gel crystals in and then let them be overnight. And what'll happen is as they move, those dead ones and the pupa congregate in the middle. And so I posted a video, and I got all excited and started talking instead of looking for the video. But I posted a video about how I collect those. That might be an interesting one to go check out. I'm trying to see if I can get when I actually did this. Yes, it's the 11th. How to remove pupa and dead mealworms. Let me see if I can link it here. Copy link. Hey, there it is. Perfect. Check that one out. It's only 5 minutes long, so it's not too ridiculous. Pretty easy to digest. And then the video just after that is 30 minutes long of me like actually harvesting. So I just like to post those things from time to time so folks can get an idea of what's going on there. But that might help with. So you had mentioned earlier you're ordering 40,000 at a time. If you accidentally leave those out overnight or something, come in the next day. And I think it's important to put the wheat bran or the water gel crystals in there to incentivize the movement, right? And I'm wiggling my fingers down lower. Incentivize that movement. And what you'll find is they'll go to the outside corners as long as the temperature is correct. And what I mean by that is it's got to be that 75 to 80, like normal room temperature. If it's cold, the reverse happens. I wish I had a video of it. It was super cool. I didn't have my phone that day, but I had left the door open at the farm just to get some sunshine in, and it was like 40 out, and the cold air came across the bins that had been harvested. And what happened is they congregated in the middle to warm themselves up, and all that dead stuff went to the outside corners and kind of separated and didn't do what I wanted it to do. So it's got to be the right temperature. It's a good trick. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in the video. Now that I think about it. Umar, my farm temperature is at 91 Fahrenheit. Humidity is about 40%. Is it too high? The temperature is a little high. What you want to be careful of is your bins can actually create microclimates. And so at 91 degrees Fahrenheit, if you get a bin that's heavily loaded with mealworms, as they move around, they're going to create friction. And depending on how thick your bedding is, bedding, substrate, and frass, like how thick all of that is, you could actually get hot spots inside of that tray. I keep my farm at 78 Fahrenheit. Optimal is like 80 to 85, right? And so you're at 91. You've got really good growth, I bet. At 40% humidity, you've got to hydrate those mealworms good before they go into pupation. You might be seeing some die off there. And maybe as they change from pupa into beetle, you might see some like wing deformities and stuff. That's usually low moisture before they go into pupation. But 91 is pretty high. So I keep the current farm at 78, and that gives me some wiggle room. I'm in Missouri. It doesn't get up to 107 all that often, but there was one day where the air conditioner stopped working, and I had a wiggle room before it got up too hot in that building to replace the air conditioner. And so I'm losing some productivity, right? Because 78 is not optimal, right? Optimal would be like 83, 85, somewhere in there. And then they'll grow a lot faster. They're just more efficient. But I want that wiggle room in the event that there's a problem. Sometimes we lose power here. Same thing. I don't have power to run the electric. I need time to get the backup hooked up and all that fun stuff. So it's a little bit high, but if it's working for you, watch for the things that I mentioned about hydration. Because at 40% humidity, they're not going to pull a lot out of the moisture, or a lot of moisture out of the air. And your pupa, you might need to create a microclimate in those bins with the pupa to keep them hydrated. Interesting question though. The heat, I'm really curious to hear how they're growing. Probably pretty quickly, but I wonder how your pupa are doing. Let's see, Kate. I usually make sure they're fully hydrated. Huh. They're fully hydrated and they're still not eating them. And there's I wish there was a way we could talk back and forth. There's other than chat. What was I thinking? There's substrate, like some sort of like wheat bran or oats or something in the bin with the mealworms and the water gel crystals. I wonder if it's Frass. Maybe they have no incentive to go to that side of the bin, but they usually have a very good sense of where that moisture's at, so they should be going to it. Let me go back and look at some of those other. Okay, more than they can eat in a few hours. That's good. And you're still finding pieces. I wonder if you could like get some pictures or maybe even a video and send it to me. Justin at Midwest. Oh, wow. Sorry. Justin at MidwestMealworms.com. The visual will probably help. Maybe we can figure out what's going on there. Because now I'm super curious. We'll figure it out. If you can get me some more info, we'll do some more digging. Supreme. Thanks for the link. We'll check it out. You microwave all your bran. That's wheat bran, correct? Yes. So, well, these guys over here, the bags that are open are actually Frass that we've collected. I need to get that into a container. That's one of the projects I want to work on today, but I pulled a muscle in my chest, so I'm having a hard time moving around. But these bags behind me, this is wheat bran. And so we use that for the substrate. I don't microwave it because this is a full, get out of the way here. This is a full 50-pound bag, so I would need a pretty big microwave. So what I do instead is I deep freeze it for at least 48 hours. Deep freeze, not regular standard freezer on a fridge type setup. Deep freeze, so 0 below. Do that for 48 hours, and that has been very, very effective at. I don't have insects from like this is just regular wheat bran. Even though it is human grade, there's still potentially insects in it. And so I haven't had insect problems, and I have not had grain mite issues unless I don't deep freeze it. So there have been a couple times where I got on a pinch, I got impatient and got worried and went ahead and used a bag that hadn't been put through the deep freeze. And I keep my building at about 60 to 65% humidity. And so it's just ripe for the plucking if grain mites were to get in there. And so we had I want to say the last one was maybe 6 months ago. But otherwise the deep freeze method works really, really well. Awesome questions. I'm digging this. And it seems like the audio is still working well. So Ant's Camping had said earlier it was going well. I'm assuming since you guys can hear me and you're asking more questions, it's going well. That's good. There's not too much background noise right now. It's not windy at all. I might look into some headphones for the future. And if it's raining, so we've got a metal building here. If it's raining, audio is not going to work. Nothing worse than mites. Had them one time, tried dichotomous earth to get rid, threw everything away. You had to throw everything away. That's what I'm assuming you mean there. Yes, grain mites threw everything out. Got it. Yes, grain mites they're demoralizing, like because they can destroy that colony, and it just sucks. The one thing I found outside of the preventative measure, split pea flour, like literally dried peas, and ground up is all that it is. So there are places that actually sell the split pea flour. What I do is I actually buy whole split peas. I buy split peas, so peas that have been dried and cut in half. And I've got a grinder, and I'll grind it up into a real fine powder. and it usually takes about 2 cycles through my grinder because the split peas are super hard, super dense. And so I'll do a rough grind and then I'll do a finer grind. And I just have that on hand, some of the powder. And then I've got bags of the split peas just to be able to use, because I'll sprinkle that around, kind of like the dichotomous earth. What's really cool, though, is that it doesn't hurt the mealworms. So it's not the mealworm's favorite thing to eat. So it's not like you have to replace all the substrate with that, but put in, I think, 10% of your substrate. So if you have a pound, what's that, 16 ounces? So 10% would be 1.6 ounce, 2 ounces, something like that. A scoop, whatever you can find. Throw that in there. And then I also sprinkle that on the floor or in whatever container it is that those grain mites are in. Since we have a separate building for the farm, I don't have to worry about, like it being in the house and getting grain mites, because grain mites crawl all over everything. They can get out of anything. But if you get them in your house, if your setup's in your house, petroleum jelly is a good stop, I think. And then if you put the container in a moat of water, that's another option too. That way they don't spread outside of whatever containers they're already on. So, Trickster, am I saying that right? With the 1 and the 5? That's inventive. Do you sell your Frass or do you give it away? Both. So I do have Frass available. It's on the website. I sell it on eBay too. I'll sell it at farmers markets. Talk to gardeners and growers around here, different farmers. Sell it to them. Missouri legalized cannabis, medical marijuana. Not the full-fledged cannabis, medical marijuana, and they also allow you to grow it now. And so the cannabis farmers are real big into being organic, and they know, especially on the East and West Coasts, they're really familiar with Frass. So the Missouri growers are just now getting into it, learning about it. So I sell to a couple grow stores, garden centers, things like that. And I've got a couple options. So I actually let me grab a pouch here. I don't know if I have any full, but this is just a 1 pound pouch, and it's got one of those heat seals on the top, and so you fill it. It's got a resealable, like a Ziploc bag. It has the resealable top to it. Pop that open, put the Frass in, close it, and then heat seal this. Heat seal is actually in the other building, I think. And it's got these little tearaway notches that you see on all kinds of pouches like this. And then I'll label it. And so that's a pound. And then I also just sell it by the pound. I have a lot of folks that actually just want it in these wheat bran bags because the bag, it's repurposing the bag. They'll actually use a lot of it at one time. And so it's a nice cost-effective way. There's no charging for packaging because I'm using bags that the wheat bran came in. So awesome question. I think I'm going to do about another 10 or so minutes. And then I'm going to try to get something done, even though I've got this pulled muscle here. Thank you guys for the questions. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Let me go back and look at some more of the Facebook comments here. See if I can get some answers for folks. Best veggies to feed, whatever you can find. Good rule of thumb, though, is only feed. Thank you for all the great answers. My pleasure. My hope is to do this more frequently. So I'm going to start posting, somehow get a calendar, because I want to do lives on TikTok, YouTube here, obviously, a couple other places, maybe some one-on-one consulting too, at no charge, because I love doing this. But I'm going to try to get a schedule up somewhere and posted. Anyway, best veggies to feed. So rule of thumb, whatever you're going to feed your mealworms to, whatever they can eat is open game for your mealworms. So I've actually done a whole slew of different things. So veggies, obviously, peppers, tomatoes, anything. What you need to be careful about with your veggies and anything with high moisture is the amount of moisture you're putting in. So if you were to cut up a tomato and just plop that whole thing in a bin, the mealworms are slow eaters. they're fast, but they are slow. And so if you put too much in that bin, regardless of what it is, if it's their favorite thing to eat, doesn't matter. If there's too much of that moisture in there, it's going to mold. And so you want to be careful as you move from something like a potato or a carrot, which is, it's got moisture in it, but not as much as, like a pear, a really juicy pear that's ready to, super ripe, lots of sugars in it, which is a very good attractant. So just be careful with the veggies you put in there. And you also want to think about how you're going to process that later. So you're ordering yours in, you could feed those depending on what you're doing with them. If you're using them for like your geckos, whatever your geckos can eat, that's great. Some reptiles can't do citrus, right? And so if you're also taking your mealworms and selling them or using them for bearded dragons or something that can't do citrus, be mindful of that. But best is really whatever works best for the things that are going to eat it and whatever you can get. Secondhand stuff or scraps, waste scraps. Like my neighbor here, he grows and then creates his own sauerkraut. He cold ferments it. And so I actually have 2 boxes of the outside layers of the cabbage and the cabbage core, and I just throw those into the bins in the farm, and they'll eat it. Right, so they get some good nutrients. They get varied nutrients, and it's a waste product from their perspective, but free food for the mealworms. So usually attack them. Maybe smaller pieces would be better. Smaller pieces of the water gel crystals. I wonder. I think I'm using the largest water gel crystal. I don't have a bag of them. I think I'm using the largest water gel crystal that I can find, and they're eating it completely though. Usually attack them. Maybe smaller pieces would be better. That's an interesting idea though. You could take. I'm trying to think of an effective way to make them smaller pieces. You could grind it and turn it into a powder, but then it becomes. I actually had that happen. I can't remember if I posted it on YouTube or TikTok, but it created like this paste. It did not distribute well in the bin. So I like to take the water gel crystals and, kind of like fling them in to get them across the whole bin. So the mealworms don't have to travel far. Less energy traveling is more energy to growth. And so when I started using a new supplier, and it was just like the powder that was kind of left in some places in the bag. And what I found is that it just creates this like glob. So that's just something to deal with. Like in a bigger scenario like mine, it's a process problem. But for you, that might work. So you could grind it ahead of time. And I'm thinking like a coffee grinder, like just a regular grinder. I mean, water gel crystals are not like gold. It's not something that you can't crush. Or I wonder if you hydrate it and then like, if you're raising mealworms, so run it through the one of your larger mesh sifters. If you've got one, like a 1/8 inch sifter, and just like push it through. You'll have to clean some of that off of the mesh when you're done. But I think that would be a good way to get it without grinding it and making that mushy dust stuff. That might work out. That might be a good thing to try. Let me know how that goes, if you wouldn't mind. I got them from you. I sometimes break them with my hands before putting them in the bins but that's kind of messy. Okay, they're from me. So that you're using the ones that I'm using. So they should break them with my hands before putting them in the bins, but that's kind of, yeah. And it feels really weird too. I wonder if they're just not hydrated enough. Like a short video or just a picture of it, Kate, if you could send that to me, because I'm really curious now to see what we can figure out. We'll figure it out. Something will come to mind, hopefully. I keep about 5,000 in a bin for feeding the geckos. Rest in the fridge. I don't keep a substrate. Just feed veggies and bran, so I don't have to separate the worms from bran. You see any issues with this? Let me read that again. I keep a substrate. Just feed veggies and bran. Bran to me is a substrate though. So you said you don't keep the substrate, maybe the ones in the fridge. But you're using veggies and bran because they do get some nutrients from that bran, right? Like it's one of their staples. So I don't have to separate worms from bran. I get what you're saying though, because bran, like part of the problem with bran is it sifts, like the finer particles will sift with the different sizes of worms, right? And so um, you'll get wheat bran in there. That's one of the things we do is we're timing when to process and harvest the bins when all the bran has been eaten. One of the other things you can look into is getting um, like a grinder, so that you can sift that out. You can keep them in substrate because it's good for them to eat something. Because what will happen is if they're not eating something, either moisture or substrate, they'll lose moisture in the fridge, right? And they'll shrink. And then unless you're manually hand counting them out, if you're weighing them out, you're going to be giving more in that container than what you might have done elsewhere if they were fully hydrated. Otherwise, there's really not. If it's working for you, there's not a real big problem there. The gut loading, like if you're wanting to do that, obviously do that before you feed it to something. I don't do any gut loading on mine because by the time I ship out on Mondays, and it usually takes, even here in Missouri, it's going to take 2 days to get somewhere, and within 2 to 3 days, everything's out of their system anyway. So I don't gut load anything. I let folks do that on their own, depending on what they need to do. But no, I can't think of any issues there. David, welcome, David. I think that's your first comment. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for all your help in videos. They helped us tremendously in our mealworm farming venture. Mealworms are us. I've seen you guys here. Awesome. And then you're in the Facebook group too, I think. Good stuff. Thank you for that comment. Kate will do. Thank you. Good deal. Supreme. I just feed a small bit of bran. Gotcha. Okay. Yes. Perfect. Yeah. Because if you're storing it in the fridge, you just need a little bit of bran. And then if you keep 5,000 out in a bin, as long as that's not too deep, you want to stay, like 3/4 of an inch deep if you're doing just mealworms. If you start going deeper, and it's got to be much deeper to cause like any crushing of the mealworms. One of the things I do when I deliver to a couple local customers that just order in bulk, and I deliver in a cooler, a literal cooler, little tiny cooler, not tiny, but 2 foot by 1 foot. When they order bigger orders, I have to use a bigger cooler because I don't want the weight of those mealworms to crush them. But you've got to be using a big enough container that's probably not a problem. If you have substrate in with them, that buys you some more space, right? Because then they can move in that bran, and there's not as big of an impact there from the top down pressures because the substrate helps break some of that up. Trickster, can you put mealworms in the microwave to dry them instead of the oven? Yes. Trying to think. It's been a while since I did it, but like a regular standard microwave you can do. I actually have an industrial dehydrator that's just a giant microwave. That's literally what it is. So totally doable. I would just be careful that you don't overdo it and then get that nice burnt, crispy mealworm smell in your microwave inside. That's always interesting. But yes, totally doable. David, thank you. Yes, sir. Ritesh, how I separate Frass from Oats. I think you mean Oats, OATS. So Ritesh, you want to use a 1/30th mesh sifter, and that is, let me go to Google, see if I can find some conversions. 1/30th mesh sifter. Because what that'll do is it'll let the Frass through. You will get some particles from the oats, right? Because like any substrate that the mealworms are going to eat, as they eat it, it's going to create some, that they can't ingest. It'll create some little fine particles, and some of that can get into the Frass. Excuse me. Not the end of the world, honestly. What I try to do is I will only sift after they've eaten everything. But that's because I'm collecting that Frass to sell it to someone who wants to buy just Frass. If I was just using it for my own purpose in my own garden, I honestly wouldn't worry about it that much. I would just do a light sift of something with a not as fine of a mesh, like a 1/20th. But 1/30th is what I use to let that Frass go through. And I'm trying to see, yeah, it's just a 30 mesh. So I think that's universal. If that doesn't make sense, let me know. And I can try to find, oh, I can just post a link here of what I'm looking at. You see if I can find a good option here. That's the 1/50th. Oh, the 1/50th is close. 1/50th is gonna, it'll let the very fine Frass particles through, but it will clog because it's not gonna let them all through. The 1/30th is the sweet spot. Oh, come on. It's showing me every size but the 1/30th. And I don't want to link. Let me do a quick search here. Yes. And this is on Amazon. Pros and cons to using Amazon, but at least it gets you a visual of what it is that I'm looking at here. I think I got mine on eBay at some point as well. It's still trying to show me the 1/50th. 120. Because I'm using Oats as food for worm. Yes. So the oats are totally fine. No worries on the oats. It's a good nutrient source for them. It's the same thing. It's a substrate, same thing as wheat bran. So no concerns there from using that. It's just more difficult to sift and separate out the mealworms from the oats. But the Frass from the oats should be okay once you get the 1/30th. And I don't know why it's not showing me the 1/30th. Here is a full stackable set. So this is very what I'm using, if not the exact same thing. But I only see a 1/20th in there. Let me do a quick search. Maybe it's the 1/20th. I feel like it's the 1/30th. The 30 mesh. But you're going to need something pretty fine, regardless of whether it's oats, wheat bran, whatever. Let your Frass through, and it'll keep a bulk of your substrate from going through. Now, if you're using something, so oats are totally fine. If anybody out there is using something that's finer, kind of like a flour type consistency, that's going to go through this mesh. So you're going to need to make sure that the mealworms have eaten all that if you're trying to harvest the Frass and sell it. If you're just using it for yourself, again, just whatever you end up with and whatever you're comfortable with there. Awesome. All right, guys, I need to unfortunately wrap up for right now. I've got to try to work on a Frass dispensing machine. I'm going to try to make one of those to make the Frass packaging go a little faster. So I really appreciate everybody jumping on. This will be posted to the YouTube channel. It's currently 43 minutes long, but if you want to find the pieces in there that were applicable to you, it will be posted. Thank you guys so much for joining, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. Bye.